what if, what a 12th century mystic, a 20th century Swiss psychiatrist, and a 7th century historical figure all provided the exact same map of the human mind?
I mean, it sounds like the setup to a very complicated historical puzzle.
Right, it really does.
But it is actually one of the most profound intersections of human thought we have ever looked at. We are essentially looking at a unified theory of human consciousness here.
Exactly, yeah. Usually when we talk about a psychological diagnosis or, say, a blueprint for success, there is this expectation of a very modern kind of precision.
Oh, totally, like a neat little checklist.
Yeah, exactly. A person reads a self-help book, it gives them 5 daily habits to check the boxes, and suddenly, boom, they are a highly effective, optimized machine. It is treated almost like software engineering. Update the code, fix the bug.
Right. It is completely binary. We are culturally conditioned to view success as an external accumulation, whether that is wealth, status, or even psychological peace treated as a commodity.
Yes, like buying peace of mind.
Exactly. It is very clean, and it is comforting because we like things to be visible and easily categorized.
But then we step into the world of depth psychology and ancient mysticism, and suddenly that neat little checklist is thrown entirely out the window. We are looking at a landscape of human consciousness that is just incredibly layered.
It is a massive shift in perspective.
It really is. So today, for this deep dive, we are pulling from a really diverse stack of research. We have modern lectures on simulation theory and the physics of time. We are diving into Carl Jung's shadow work and the collective unconscious.
Which is foundational stuff.
Absolutely. And we are pairing that with an audiobook of the complete philosophy of the 12th century polymath Al-Ghazali, along with an analysis of the mystic Ibn Arabi's 7 levels of the soul.
The scope of this is just incredible.
Yeah, and we are also bringing in Joseph Murphy's mid-century work on the mechanics of the subconscious mind. And tying all of this theoretical architecture together, we are examining a comprehensive historical biography of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Because the goal isn't just to do a comparative religion or psychology class here.
No, not at all. The mission, really, is to answer one central question. How do we actually hack the human ego?
Right, because what becomes overwhelmingly clear across all these diverse texts is that true success is not defined by material accumulation. It is defined by the absolute dissolution of the ego.
Which is terrifying for most of us.
Oh, completely terrifying.
Right.
But it is about the complete alignment of the conscious and subconscious mind with a higher divine reality. We are looking at how ancient Eastern metaphysics and modern Western depth psychology are describing the exact same mechanisms of the mind.
So let's start at the baseline. Where does this journey actually begin for the average human being? Because according to Ibn Arabi, the starting line for most of humanity is a state of complete and utter unconsciousness.
Yes, he maps this out beautifully. He calls the starting point level 1.
Right, nafs al-amara.
Exactly, nafs al-amara, which translates to the commanding self. And this is where almost everyone begins, and tragically, where a vast majority of people remain for their entire lives.
It's kind of bleak when we think about it.
It is, because the commanding self is entirely driven by instinct. It operates entirely on biological and social automation.
So it's basically just reactive.
Purely reactive. It is purely motivated by pursuing pleasure, avoiding pain, dominating others, and above all, protecting the fragile ego at absolutely all costs.
But I think the terrifying part is the lack of awareness. At level 1, a person has absolutely no idea they are being driven by these impulses. They genuinely think they're making free, rational choices.
They're completely convinced of their own rationality.
Right. An insult triggers a feeling of disrespect, and they lash out in anger without a single millisecond of a gap between the stimulus and their response. They think, well, I'm angry because that person was rude, completely blind to the fact that their reaction was an automated defense mechanism.
It's just protecting a deeply insecure ego.
Exactly. And their moral compass at this level is entirely external. It is completely transactional.
What do you mean by transactional?
Well, Ibn Arabi notes something fascinating here. People at this level are not necessarily obvious criminals. They can be very socially successful. They might even look highly religious or incredibly philanthropic.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they treat ethics, religion, or societal rules exactly like a business deal. They think, I will behave well only so society doesn't punish me. Or I will do this charitable deed solely so God gives me a reward, or so I get a plaque with my name on the wall.
So it's not real goodness. It's just a calculation.
Precisely. There is no actual internal transformation. The core of the person hasn't changed at all. Their behavior is simply being modified by the threat of a stick or the promise of a carrot.
Man. And this exact illusion of control, where we think we are acting out of virtue but are actually driven by hidden impulses, is precisely what necessitated the entire field of psychoanalysis centuries later.
Carl Jung built his whole framework around this exact blindness. Right. Most people who follow psychology know what the persona is. It's the mask we wear for society. It's the polished, agreeable, predictable version of ourselves that gets praised and hired.
But beneath that mask is the shadow.
Yes, the shatter. It contains everything we have repressed because society or our parents told us it was unacceptable.
And what is so vital to understand here is that the shadow isn't just quote-unquote evil traits, it is the rejected side of the self.
Right, like it's not just a serial killer hiding inside us.
Exactly. A child gets angry and they are told good people don't get angry, so they bury the anger. They learn to smile when they are hurt.
So they just push it down into the basement.
Yeah, and years later, they are an adult who prides themselves on being incredibly calm and reasonable. But that buried anger leaks out in passive-aggressive comments or in sudden irritability over tiny inconveniences.
Or by completely shutting down during conflicts.
Yes. They don't see themselves as angry, but everyone around them does.
And it goes the other way too, right? If someone was taught that ambition was inherently selfish, they bury their drive. If they were taught vulnerability was a weakness, they bury their fundamental human need for connection.
And then they walk around feeling completely hollow.
Exactly. They wonder why they can't connect with anyone, totally unaware that they locked their own capacity for intimacy in a box 30 years ago.
As Jung famously wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate."
Wow. Yeah. That quote is it's chilling.
It really is. People will constantly date the exact same toxic partner or sabotage their careers in the exact same way, and they will blame the universe. They will call it bad luck.
But Jung is saying, no, it isn't bad luck at all.
Right. Jung is saying it is your unintegrated shadow repeating a pattern because it is desperately trying to be seen.
That perfectly aligns with Al-Ghazali's concept. I mean, writing centuries before Jung, Al-Ghazali called this baseline state spiritual sleep.
Yes, the sleep of the heedless.
Right. He diagnosed humanity with what he termed diseases of the heart, things like pride, anger, and greed. But what takes Ghazali a step further than standard pop psychology is his observation of how the shadow uses our intellect to disguise itself as a virtue.
That is perhaps Al-Ghazali's most brilliant psychological observation. He points out that intellectual achievement can completely feed a person's ego while disguising itself as a noble, objective pursuit.
So like a scholar or a scientist.
Exactly. A person might master theology, philosophy, or modern physics and feel intellectually superior to everyone around them. They are entirely blind to the fact that their pursuit of knowledge, which is objectively a good thing, has made them spiritually diseased with arrogance.
So the tragedy of level one, whether we use Arabi's Amara, Ghazali's spiritual sleep, or Jung's unintegrated shadow, is not that we have base desires. The absolute imprisonment is not knowing one is imprisoned.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
We have this modern perspective from one of our sources, Osama al-Sharafa, that offers a really profound analogy for this exact blindness. He breaks down the human experience into the Ruh and the nafs.
The consciousness and the ego.
Exactly. The Ruh is pure consciousness. He compares it to the physical screen of a television. The only reason a movie can be projected, the only reason there is an experience at all, is because the blank screen is there.
But when that pure consciousness enters this world and mixes with the physical mind,
it becomes the nafs. It becomes the ego or the biological suit we wear.
And Al-Sharafa points out something profound about the word ignorance. Ignorance literally means ignoring the truth of this reality.
Oh, I see. So a person at level one is actively ignoring the fundamental reality that they are the screen, the quiet, witnessing consciousness.
Yes. Instead, they completely identify with the movie playing on the screen. They think they are the suit. They think they are their job title, their bank account, their fleeting emotions.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If level one is basically a biological smartphone running a dozen hidden background apps that are completely draining the battery, apps like repressed anger, greed, the need for validation, isn't that just evolutionary survival?
That's a very common pushback.
Right, because humans evolved to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and fit into the tribe to avoid being eaten by predators. Why do all these thinkers, mystics, and psychiatrists alike treat this foundational ego as a quote-unquote disease or a shadow that needs to be escaped? Why not just accept that we are clever animals?
It is a vital question. What is crucial to understand is that none of these frameworks actually demonize the baseline instincts.
They don't.
No, not at all. Jung doesn't say the shadow is inherently evil. He says it is a necessary part of the total self. Al-Ghazali doesn't say humans shouldn't have biological desires. He recognizes them as necessary for the continuation of the species.
Okay, so what is the actual problem then?
The danger, as Jung, Ghazali, and Arabi all vehemently agree, is staying blind to them. If a person operates on pure instinct without awareness, they are a biological machine. They are reacting to hidden childhood wounds and unconscious fears, not making sovereign choices.
Right. They're just a puppet.
Exactly. If those survival instincts remain unconscious in a modern society where we aren't literally running from predators, they metastasize. They tyrannize the individual. They turn a survival mechanism into a source of perpetual psychological torture.
So how does a biological machine wake up? How does a person break out of this mechanical sleep? Because it is rarely a gentle, peaceful transition.
No, it is usually violent.
Right. It usually requires a massive shock to the system, and that transitions us into the agonizing phase of spiritual crisis. This is what Ibn Arabi maps out as level 2, nafs al-lawwama,
Which translates to the accusing self.
the accusing self. This is the level of awakening, and it is incredibly painful. At level 2, the capacity for genuine self-reflection finally comes online.
Yes. The person is no longer an unconscious automaton just reacting to stimuli. They can actually step back, observe their own behavior, and critically judge it.
But this newfound awareness creates an absolute internal civil war.
It really does. The way it is described sounds like pure psychological torture. It is a state where a person acts out of their shadow, maybe they explode in anger at their child, or they lie to get ahead at work, and immediately afterward they feel immense, crushing guilt.
Yes, the guilt is overwhelming. They promise themselves they will change. They make absolute, ironclad resolutions.
And then days, or sometimes just hours later, they fall back into the exact same automated pattern.
It is a constant, exhausting cycle of sin, self-condemnation, resolution, and failure.
Ibn Arabi observed that a huge percentage of people who consider themselves religious or on a quote-unquote self-improvement journey are actually just permanently stuck right here at level 2.
It's just endlessly looping.
Exactly. They are sincere. They genuinely want to be good people, but they are fighting a war against their own biology and conditioning with the wrong weapons. They might meditate or pray with pure intention in the morning and then ruthlessly backbite about a colleague by noon.
They experience real moments of profound connection and then fall right back into heedlessness.
Right. The entire psychology of this level is based on self-accusation. They spend enormous amounts of cognitive energy just punishing themselves emotionally.
The ultimate historical example of this specific crisis comes from Al-Ghazali himself, and this is a sequence of events that is just incredibly relevant to modern high achievers.
The crisis of 1095.
Yes. So the year is 1095. Al-Ghazali is 37 years old. He is sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the intellectual and political world. He's the chief professor at Nizamiya University in Baghdad.
Which was the center of the world at that time.
Absolutely. To put that in context, that is like being the tenured head of a department at Harvard, Oxford, and MIT simultaneously. He has mastered law, theology, philosophy, logic. He has the ear of kings. He is a superstar.
He had acquired absolutely everything the commanding self could ever possibly want. Extreme wealth, unrivaled prestige, and ultimate social validation.
But beneath that glittering exterior, he was experiencing a profound, devastating, skeptical awakening. He began to realize that his intellectual mastery was actually lacking spiritual authenticity.
He realized his intentions were compromised.
Right. He realized he was teaching, debating, and writing not for the sake of uncovering universal truth, but for the sake of fame, position, and maintaining his own persona.
And what makes this so fascinating is that it wasn't just a quiet philosophical realization. His body actually physically rebelled against his lifestyle.
Yeah, the internal contradiction became so severe that he literally lost his ability to speak. He stood at the podium in front of hundreds of students and could not deliver his lectures.
His digestion completely stopped working.
The best doctors in Baghdad examined him and couldn't do anything
Yeah.
because the illness was entirely psychosomatic. It was the accusing self absolutely tearing down the persona he had spent his entire life building.
It is a classic example of what we might call today a nervous breakdown, but on a cosmic spiritual level. The unconscious was forcing its way out through his biology.
Precisely. The tension between his conscious persona and his unconscious reality literally broke his physical body. And his response to this is what makes him a legend.
He didn't just take a 6-month sabbatical or go on a retreat.
No, he permanently abandoned his prestigious position. He distributed his vast wealth, left his family with enough provisions to live comfortably, and completely walked away from his career, his status, and his identity.
He became a wandering ascetic to seek genuine truth.
He recognized that the intellectual certainty he had built was a house of cards. He used what scholars call therapeutic doubt. He didn't doubt things just to be a contrarian, the way modern cynics might.
No, he used doubt like a surgical scalpel.
Exactly, to cut away his own false certainties and ego attachments.
It is the ultimate shadow confrontation. He realized his quote-unquote virtue was just his ego in a very nice suit. Jung experienced something very similar when he broke away from Sigmund Freud.
Oh, that's right. Freud was the undisputed king of psychoanalysis.
And Jung was his heir apparent. But Jung walked away from that immense prestige because he fundamentally disagreed with Freud's map of the mind.
Why did he break away exactly?
Well, Jung broke from Freud because Freud saw the unconscious primarily as a dark storage room for repressed, mostly sexual desires. It was a garbage dump for the things polite society didn't want to look at.
Right, just a dark basement.
But Jung saw the unconscious differently. He saw it as a living, autonomous entity with its own profound intelligence. Jung realized that when the conscious mind violently suppresses the unconscious, which is what Ghazali was doing with his doubts before his breakdown, it creates severe symptoms like anxiety, depression, and obsession.
And if a person ignores those symptoms?
The unconscious will eventually mount a hostile takeover.
Jung's framework of archetypes illustrates this perfectly. Imagine someone who has spent their whole life playing the archetype of the caregiver.
Okay.
They are hyper-responsible. They are the person everyone in the family and the office counts on. They're constantly fixing everyone else's problems while systematically ignoring their own needs. They think they are just being a good person.
But because they have completely suppressed their fundamental human need for freedom, spontaneity, or play, another archetype, what Jung calls the trickster, is growing stronger and stronger in the shadow.
Right. The energy of that suppressed desire doesn't just evaporate. It accumulates.
Exactly. And then one day, this hyper-responsible, perfectly reliable person just snaps. They do something completely out of character.
They suddenly quit a stable job with no backup plan. They blow up a 10-year marriage over a trivial argument. They disappear for a weekend without telling anyone.
And everyone around them is in shock, saying, this isn't them.
But Jung would say, no, it is absolutely them. It is the trickster. It was never allowed a voice, so it got tired of waiting, bypassed the conscious mind entirely, and hijacked the person's life to force a change.
That is the immense danger of a divided psyche. And it gets even more insidious with a psychological defense mechanism called projection.
Oh, projection is huge.
Jung warns that whatever a person absolutely refuses to see in their own shadow, they will inevitably project onto the people around them.
So if a person has completely disowned their own capacity for selfishness,
They will walk into a room and immediately see everyone else as selfish and calculating. If they have deeply buried their own anger, they will perceive the world as a hostile, threatening place.
they start seeing enemies everywhere.
Right, creating intense paranoia, completely unaware that they were just fighting their own shadow reflected back at them in the faces of other people.
I have to be honest, this level 2 state, the accusing self, sounds like an autoimmune disease of the soul.
That is a brilliant analogy.
The mind has finally become sharp enough to observe its own flaws, but instead of healing them, it just turns its weapons inward and starts attacking itself. So, if level 2 is just constant torturous guilt, self-sabotage, and projecting anger onto others, how does anyone actually move past it?
It's the million-dollar question.
Why wouldn't a person just throw their hands up, numb the pain with alcohol, mindless scrolling, or sheer busyness, and slide right back into the blissful, automated ignorance of level 1?
Well, sliding back into numbness is exactly what a massive portion of the population does. Waking up is agonizing, so they hit the metaphorical snooze button through constant distraction.
Right. It's just easier.
But the key to moving forward, which both Jung and Ibn Arabi point out with incredible clarity, is shifting the internal mechanism from self-punishment to objective witnessing. Jung calls this process integration.
Integration. Okay.
Integration does not mean fighting the shadow. It means illuminating it. You welcome the suppressed anger or fear into the light, not to indulge it, not to act on it destructively, but to finally understand what it is trying to protect.
Ibn Arabi says something so profound here about escaping the accusing self. He notes that a person must realize that both the illicit desire they are feeling and the internal judge violently condemning that desire are movements of the exact same ego.
Yes, there are just two sides of the same coin.
The ego loves to play both the criminal and the cop, because as long as there is an internal war, the ego remains the center of attention. The way out isn't winning the war. The way out is stepping back into pure consciousness.
Realizing that you are the silent witness observing both the desire and the judgment.
Exactly. You step out of the arena entirely. And once that exhausting internal war ceases, the real work of building a unified self begins. We transition from crisis to alchemy.
This brings us to Ibn Arabi's middle stages. Once a person stops attacking themselves, they reach level 3.
Nafs al-Muhammad, the inspired self.
Right. At this stage, genuine intuition awakens. The constant internal static quiets down. A person can feel a surge of anger without immediately becoming the anger. There is finally a vast, quiet space between the stimulus and the response.
And from that space, they move into level 4, Nafs al-Mutmainna, the tranquil self. This is a massive turning point.
It really is. In the Islamic tradition, this is the first level explicitly praised in the Quran with the verse, "O tranquil soul, return to your Lord well-pleased and well-pleasing."
This is where the ego finally surrenders and aligns with divine will. It is the absolute death of the reactive, automated self.
At level 4, a profound shift happens regarding effort. Duties and moral actions are no longer external burdens.
Right, you don't have to force it anymore.
Exactly. A person at this level doesn't have to grit their teeth and force themselves to be patient or generous. Those qualities begin to flow naturally because the internal resistance is gone. The external law and the internal heart have become one entity.
Al-Ghazali describes the mechanics of this transformation in his masterwork, The Alchemy of Happiness. He posits that the human soul can literally be transformed from its base, reactive disease condition into pure, spiritual gold.
But Ghazali is very specific about how this alchemy actually works. It isn't just a vague feeling of peace. It requires 4 very specific types of foundational knowledge.
Okay, let's go through them. First is knowledge of self.
Right. This means deeply realizing that the true self is not the physical body, the fluctuating emotions, or the social role a person plays. Those are just instruments.
So trying to find ultimate, lasting satisfaction through bodily pleasures or climbing the corporate ladder is, well, as Ghazali might say, it's like trying to quench a deep internal thirst by drinking salt water.
It only makes the disease worse. Exactly.
The second requirement is knowledge of God.
Interestingly, Ghazali says this must begin with deep contemplation of the sheer, staggering wonder of human physiology and consciousness before moving to the abstract divine attributes. You look at the microcosm to understand the macrocosm.
Wow. Okay, and the third is knowledge of this world.
This one is absolutely crucial for psychological stability. It means fundamentally shifting your perception to see the material world as a temporary stage. It's a marketplace to acquire provisions for a journey, not a permanent secure home.
So if we know a hotel room isn't ours, we don't weep when we have to leave it.
That is the perfect analogy.
And the fourth is knowledge of the next world. This is the understanding that human consciousness survives physical death, which radically shifts a person's priorities and risk assessment in the present moment.
But what is truly fascinating is how this ancient mystical alchemy mirrors the modern psychological mechanics described by Joseph Murphy in his work on the subconscious mind.
Yes, Joseph Murphy introduces a psychological principle called the law of reversed effort. This principle dictates what happens when your conscious imagination and your conscious willpower come into direct conflict.
And Murphy states unequivocally that when they conflict, imagination always inevitably wins.
This is such a vital concept to grasp. Let's look at a practical example. If we place a simple wooden plank, maybe a foot wide, flat on the floor, anyone can walk across it easily.
Right, no problem.
Your willpower says walk, and your imagination says this is a piece of wood on the floor. They are perfectly aligned. But if we take that exact same plank and place it 20 feet in the air between 2 scaffolding towers,
The dynamic changes entirely.
completely. Your willpower still says walk, but your imagination vividly pictures losing your balance and falling to the concrete. The imagination wins. You freeze.
In fact, the harder you try to force yourself to walk, the more your body shakes and the more likely you are to fall. The mental effort actually defeats itself.
We see this all the time. Think of someone suffering from insomnia. The harder they try to force themselves to sleep using pure willpower, the more awake and anxious they become.
Or someone having a panic attack trying to forcefully command their heart to stop racing. It is the accusing self trying to violently bully the biology.
So what's the solution?
Murphy says true psychological integration requires what he calls the effortless way. It requires reconditioning the subconscious, not through violent force, but through relaxed acceptance, disciplined imagination, and feeling the reality of the desired state.
You don't wrestle with the current negative state. You calmly visualize and emotionally inhabit the positive one until the subconscious accepts the new blueprint.
And this maps perfectly back onto Al-Ghazali's concept of spiritual poverty. Now, we need to be very clear here. Spiritual poverty doesn't mean literal destitution.
Right. It doesn't mean a person has to live in a cave wearing rags and eating stale bread.
Exactly. It is a highly advanced psychological state. It is true equilibrium. A person might be a billionaire, but they are completely emotionally detached from that wealth.
They view material goods, capital, and influence strictly as tools to be deployed, rather than relying on them as their ultimate source of identity or security.
If they lost it all tomorrow, their core self wouldn't move an inch.
Jung's concept of integration parallels this state beautifully. Jung notes that a massive amount of our daily cognitive energy is tied up in internal conflict.
The persona trying to hide the shadow.
Right, the accusing self punishing the ego. When those fragmented parts of the psyche finally stop fighting each other, all that trapped internal energy is subtly released.
It is exactly like removing a massive dam of debris that was blocking a river. The water suddenly surges forward naturally.
A person acting for the unified self, rather than the fragmented, insecure ego, no longer strives purely to achieve status or to prove themselves to others.
But,
Wait, I need to pose a serious challenge here.
go ahead.
This all sounds beautiful in theory, but let's look at the practical implications. If someone actually reaches this tranquil stage where they truly do not care about external validation, they aren't driven by the need to prove themselves to their parents or society, and they completely accept everything as the perfect decree of the universe, doesn't that just kill all human ambition?
That is the most common critique.
Right. If a person is entirely at peace with the universe exactly as it is, why would they ever invent anything, build a company, or fight against a political injustice? Do they just sit under a tree in a state of Zen bliss while the world burns around them?
It is a very logical question and a very common assumption, but it is a massive misconception of what this state actually is.
How so?
Well, Al-Ghazali stresses this point heavily, and he proved it by his own return to society after his isolation. Mystical realization and ego dissolution actually enhance effective action in the world.
Enhance it.
Yes. Think about it mechanically. A normal person's energy is constantly being drained by resentment, greed, anxiety, fear of failure, and the exhausting 24/7 job of protecting their fragile ego.
Okay, that makes sense. We waste a lot of energy.
When you strip all of that friction away, the person gains supreme, unobstructed energy. They become infinitely more capable of fighting injustice, building societal infrastructure, and serving humanity, because their actions are no longer compromised by selfish fears or the desperate need for applause.
They're acting as a clear conduit, not a clogged pipe.
Exactly.
To prove that this extreme state of internal peace does not equate to passivity or checking out of society, we have to look at the ultimate historical embodiment of these concepts.
Yes.
We're looking at a historical figure who manifested these precise psychological states while living an intensely active, heavily burdened, and extraordinarily difficult life. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
If we follow Ibn Arabi's map to its absolute conclusion, we reach level 7, nafs al-kamila, which translates to the perfected self, or insan al-kamil, the perfect human.
The sources we are examining present the life of the prophet not just as a religious narrative, but as the ultimate historical manifestation of this psychological state. And analyzing his biography through this specific lens of ego dissolution is incredibly revealing.
Let's start with the early foundations of his life, because the environment is critical. He wasn't raised in a palace, shielded from the harsh realities of the world like a sheltered prince.
No. As an infant, following the custom of the time, he was given to a Bedouin foster family to be raised in the harsh, sterile, unforgiving environment of the desert.
The explicit goal of this custom was to build sheer physical and mental stamina.
Later, growing up as an orphan under the care of his uncle Abu Talib, he worked for years as a shepherd.
Working as a shepherd is a universally vital detail in the lives of many prophets, and psychologically it makes perfect sense.
How does that map onto ego dissolution?
Tending vulnerable flocks in lonely, arid valleys teaches immense patience, deep observation, and a kind of protective leadership that is entirely devoid of ego. You cannot act out of vanity or arrogance with a flock of sheep.
Right. They don't care about your status.
Exactly. It is a quiet, profound preparation away from the mechanical, transactional, status-obsessed society of the city.
Then comes the shock of awakening. As he approached his 40s, he began isolating himself in the cave of Hira on a mountain outside Mecca. He was breaking completely away from the idol-worshipping, deeply stratified, hyper-capitalist society of Mecca.
And there, he experiences a terrifying encounter with revelation that completely and utterly shatters his ordinary reality.
According to the historical record, the angel Gabriel commands him to read. He is illiterate, he states that he cannot read, and he is physically squeezed until he thinks he is going to die.
He runs home trembling in absolute terror, asking his wife Khadija to cover him with blankets.
It is the ultimate shattering of the ordinary baseline self to make way for the immense weight of the divine reality.
And as he accepts this reality and begins his mission, we see how he perfectly embodies Ibn Arabi's levels 5 and 6.
Let's break those down. Level 5 is nafs al-radiyya.
The pleased self. This is a staggering psychological state where a person stops having personal, ego-driven preferences about what happens to them.
So they just don't care.
No, it is not born out of defeatism or apathy. It comes from a genuine, overwhelming recognition that whatever the divine decrees is inherently perfect.
And level 6 is mardiyya, the pleasing self, where the individual's actions are so thoroughly purified that they are entirely aligned with the divine will.
The most emotional and powerful illustration of this state in action is the famous incident at Taif. The context here is crucial.
Yeah, the context is everything. He has spent years facing immense persecution in Mecca. His followers have been tortured. He and his family were subjected to a brutal 3-year economic and social boycott that literally starved his people.
And then he loses his beloved wife, Khadija.
Who was his absolute emotional anchor.
Shortly after, he loses his uncle Abu Talib, who provided his physical and political protection.
It's the year of sorrow. In a state of profound grief and physical vulnerability, he travels by foot to the neighboring city of Taif to seek refuge and perhaps find a receptive audience for his message.
And the response from the leaders of Taif was exceptionally cruel. They didn't just reject his theological arguments, they mocked him. And then they set the youth and the crowds of the city upon him.
He was pelted with stones as he fled, chased for miles out of the city until his shoes were literally filled with his own blood.
He finally collapses in a private orchard, entirely alone, physically battered, bleeding, and emotionally devastated.
If we look at this through the lens of psychology, for anyone operating at level 1, the commanding self, the response to this level of humiliation and pain would be immediate, impulsive rage.
It would be a demand for vengeance, a desire to see the city of Taif wiped off the map.
But what is his response? He makes a prayer that is recorded verbatim in the historical sources, and it is the absolute definition of authentic gratitude and unshakable inner peace amidst profound human grief.
He prays, complaining only to God of his own human weakness and lack of resources.
And then concludes with a sentence that defies ordinary psychology. As long as you are not angry with me, I do not care.
As long as you're not angry with me, I do not care. It is the realization that the pleasure of the divine is the singular absolute metric that matters. He is bleeding, he is grieving. But underneath the very real human feelings of sadness and physical pain, there is an unshakable pleasure in the divine decree. He didn't suppress his humanity. The tears and the grief were real. He wasn't a robot, but his ego was entirely transparent. It didn't calcify the pain into resentment.
And we see this perfected state manifesting in highly practical, systemic action, just as Al-Ghazali argued it would. It wasn't just mystical detachment where he floated above the world. It was highly engaged, gritty leadership.
Look at his conduct during warfare and governance. After the Battle of Badr, where the significantly outnumbered Muslims achieved their first major military victory against the Meccan forces that had tortured and exiled them, the Prophet commanded the humane, dignified treatment of the prisoners of war.
He even instituted a policy offering freedom to any literate captive who would teach 10 Muslim children how to read and write.
Think about the mechanics of that decision. A level 1 conqueror, operating out of the shadow's need for dominance and revenge, would execute their enemies to cement their power and soothe their trauma.
But a level 7 leader, operating with a perfected self, utilizes the situation for the long-term elevation of the entire society through education.
We see this immense psychological control again during the agonizing month-long trial when a malicious, entirely fabricated rumor was spread about his wife, Aisha.
Right, the hypocrisy of the society was swirling, directly attacking his honor, his family, and his political legitimacy. A lesser leader, driven by a fragile persona, would have reacted with impulsive rage, immediately punishing the accusers to protect his reputation and project strength.
But he waited. He endured the agonizing uncertainty with profound patience. He sought truthful testimonies. He allowed the divine decree to unfold naturally rather than acting from the ego's desperate need to control the narrative.
We also see this in his economic policies. He entirely reformed the marketplaces of Medina.
The sources detail how the existing markets were rife with corruption, heavy exploitative taxes, and the hoarding of essential goods to drive up prices.
Operating from a state of total equity, he established a new market system based on absolute transparency. He strictly forbade the hoarding of goods and removed the oppressive taxes, integrating deep spiritual ethics directly into the daily friction of commerce.
He proved that an economy doesn't have to be driven by the greed of the commanding self.
And the ultimate spectacular dissolution of the ego is seen at the very end of his life. During his farewell Hajj, standing before tens of thousands of devoted followers who hung on his every word, he delivered a sermon that completely dismantled the entrenched social hierarchies of his time.
In an era built entirely on tribal pride and bloodlines, he explicitly declared that a white person has no superiority over a black person, nor a black person over a white person, except in piety and good action.
He forcefully emphasized women's rights and established a universal human brotherhood, entirely removing race and lineage as metrics of human worth.
Then, in his final days on earth, despite being the absolute head of state, the undisputed victorious leader of the entire Arabian Peninsula, his focus was absolute, terrifying humility.
He dragged his feverish body to the mosque and demanded that if he had ever unjustly hit anyone, they should come forward right then and strike his back in return. If he owed anyone a single coin, they should claim it so he could pay it.
And the story of the 7 silver coins is just incredible.
He is drifting in and out of consciousness on his deathbed in severe pain, and he suddenly panics because he remembers there are 7 silver coins kept in his house. He demands they be given to the poor immediately, terrified of meeting his Lord while holding on to even a tiny, insignificant fraction of worldly wealth.
It is the starkest contrast imaginable to the commanding self, which spends its dying breath trying to secure its legacy, its wealth, and its monuments.
Wait, I need to stop us here because there's a massive contradiction staring us in the face.
What's that?
We started this deep dive talking about a blueprint for success. But if we look at the historical reality of his life, he never knew his father. His mother died when he was 6. His grandfather died shortly after. He buried his beloved wife. He buried almost all of his children during his own lifetime. He faced constant assassination attempts, warfare, starvation, and betrayal.
Yes, that is an unfathomable amount of trauma.
Exactly. In what psychological universe is a life filled with that much suffering considered the ultimate blueprint for a quote-unquote success?
That exact contradiction highlights the fatal flaw in how modern society defines success. If success is merely the absence of suffering, the accumulation of comfort, and a life of unbroken ease, then no, his life wouldn't fit that definition at all.
Right. It would be a failure by modern standards.
But the fantasy of a pain-free life is a level 1 illusion. If we look at brilliant existential thinkers like Viktor Frankl or Friedrich Nietzsche, they observe that human meaning is not found in the avoidance of suffering, but through suffering.
Frankl survived the unimaginable horrors of the concentration camps and realized that those who survived psychologically intact were those who found profound meaning in their suffering.
Yes. To live is to suffer, to survive is to find some meaning in the suffering.
The prophet's life emphatically proves that a perfected self still feels the very real pain of human existence. The grief of burying a child is real. The physical pain of being stoned is real.
But because the ego is so completely transparent to the divine light, the suffering doesn't encounter the friction of a fragile ego.
Therefore, it doesn't cause bitterness, resentment, or a collapse into nihilism.
Instead, the suffering actually accelerates spiritual alignment. Every loss strips away a temporary attachment to the material world, driving the soul closer and closer to the eternal reality.
Understanding this perfected state naturally leads us to a profound metaphysical question. How is this even mechanically possible? What are the underlying physics of reality and the human mind that allow for such a radical transformation of consciousness?
This brings us to the final layer of our research, exploring the synthesis of modern subconscious theory with the ancient Islamic metaphysical view of reality.
Right. Osama al-Shurafa brings up a compelling concept here that bridges the ancient and the modern. He compares our physical existence to a highly advanced test platform, somewhat akin to a simulation or a matrix.
Let's return to the Ruh and the nafs. The Ruh, the pure witnessing consciousness, is simply the screen.
And the nafs, the biological mind, and the ego creates this sensation of linear time through the constant turning movement of thoughts.
And the ultimate test of this simulation is whether you get entirely lost in the dramatic movie playing on the screen, or if you can maintain the awareness that you are the screen itself.
The ultimate catastrophic failure of this test is illustrated in the theological story of Iblis, or Satan. And the sources analyze Iblis not just as a mythological villain with horns, but as the ultimate archetypal failure of shadow integration.
Yes, Iblis was incredibly knowledgeable. The traditions state he was perhaps the greatest worshipper, active in all seven heavens, possessing immense intellectual and spiritual power.
But he failed completely because of unchecked, unintegrated arrogance.
When commanded by the divine to prostrate to the newly created human, Adam, he flatly refused, stating, "I am better than him. You created me from fire and him from clay."
It was the ultimate, fatal assertion of the ego over the divine command.
The analysis here makes a fascinating linguistic point. In this tradition, seeking refuge in God is actually seeking refuge from the concept of I, or me. The obsession with the self, the I am better, I deserve this, I am offended, is the root of all spiritual disease.
This connects flawlessly back to Joseph Murphy's rules regarding the mechanics of the subconscious mind. Murphy states that the subconscious mind is the master builder of the body and the environment.
But it is blind. It acts exactly and ruthlessly upon the blueprints given to it by the conscious mind.
So if the conscious mind is entirely dominated by the word I, by envy, fear, resentment, or a chronic sense of lack, which is the baseline operating system of the level 1 nafs,
The subconscious faithfully goes to work reproducing poverty, misery, and conflict in the person's physical reality.
therefore, true spiritual transformation, what Al-Ghazali called the alchemy of happiness, is, in highly practical terms, the process of reprogramming the subconscious mind.
And in the Islamic tradition, the primary, most powerful tool for this reprogramming is intention, or niyyah.
Al-Shurafa describes intention beautifully as a cloak that you place over ordinary circumstances. If your intention is purely and genuinely aligned with the divine, then even the most mundane biological activities, sleeping, eating a meal, going to an office to earn a livelihood, are instantly transformed into acts of profound worship.
By setting that intention, you are feeding the subconscious mind a continuous, unbroken blueprint of divine alignment. You stop identifying with the fragile suit of the nafs and start identifying with the eternal consciousness observing it.
It is the ultimate paradox. To win at everything, to achieve the ultimate integration that Carl Jung proposes, you must completely surrender the fragmented, desperate ego that wants to win in the first place.
That is exactly the point.
Let me use an analogy here to map this out. If the subconscious mind is the massive engine room of a ship, and it just blindly follows whatever telegraph orders are sent down from above.
And the conscious mind is the captain standing on the bridge.
Right. What happens if the captain is asleep at the wheel? Or worse, what if the captain is hallucinating based on childhood trauma? How do we ensure the captain actually wakes up and stays awake so the ship doesn't crash into the rocks?
Al-Ghazali answers this with his rigorous concept of vigilant self-examination. Awakening is not a one-time cinematic event where you have an epiphany on a mountaintop and then you are enlightened forever.
The captain stays awake through continuous, daily, unglamorous practice.
It means constantly monitoring your thoughts at the door of your mind. It means practicing radical gratitude.
Joseph Murphy actually notes that a thankful heart is mathematically always closer to the creative forces of the universe, acting as the ultimate multiplier of wealth, peace, and integration.
It requires constantly, gently redirecting the will toward ultimate reality, day after day, moment by moment.
So synthesizing this massive blueprint we've unpacked today, we started by mapping the chaotic, instinct-driven shadow of the commanding self, where we act as blind slaves to our hidden biological and social impulses.
We walked through the agonizing but absolutely necessary crisis of the accusing self, where the mind turns its weapons on itself in guilt and realization.
We explored the psychological alchemy and integration that leads to the tranquil self, where moral duties shift from heavy burdens to natural flowing inclinations.
And finally, we examine the ultimate embodied realization of this entire journey in the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who maintained absolute inner peace, total ego dissolution, and divine alignment through the most immense human trials imaginable.
The blueprint for true success, synthesized across all these incredibly diverse historical and psychological sources, is found at the exact intersection of rigorous self-awareness and absolute unconditional surrender to the divine reality.
It is about doing the hard work of making the unconscious conscious, shining a light into the shadow, and then taking that unified consciousness and submitting it to something infinitely greater than yourself.
And that leads to a final lingering thought for us to ponder as we close. According to Ibn Arabi, at level 7, the perfected self, the individual knows themselves only as a temporary, transparent form through which eternal consciousness experiences itself.
They are like a single wave that finally remembers it is made of the entire ocean.
Therefore, the ultimate beautiful irony of all psychological and spiritual transformation is this, is the absolute peak of human success, actually the complete transparent disappearance of the very self you spent your whole life trying to build.